So, of course, I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're talking about using the Onshape mobile app. So, today's going to be a bit different in terms of our normal webinars in that we're not going to be working in the browser. We're going to be working using the Onshape mobile app. So, I really just want to focus on the key things that you need to know getting started using Onshape mobile. What are the tips that you need to know not just to view the model, but to actually edit and make real changes and meaningful changes from a phone or from a tablet. So that's what we're going to focus on, really the mobile heavy tips that I can give you. And for those out there doing mobile edits and making changes on a mobile device, the things that you have to know. All right, so that's using Onshape Mobile. That's going to be the topic for today. As I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to stop and address the questions from time to time. Now, before I get into the specifics of using Onshape Mobile, there are a few things that I like to mention about Onshape in general. And one of the first is our mission statement, and that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And this is very much tied into today's theme of using Onshape Mobile. We have a full-blown CAD creation tool in the mobile app, and that's something that's really unique to Onshape. You have the ability to not just view or mark up, but to create sketches, parts, features, assemblies from a phone or from a tablet. But this also means, other devices as well: Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks. So there's a long list of devices that you can access your CAD data from. And we're giving you not just the ability to view, but also to edit and then to work together, work collaboratively. So everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. That's our mission. Now, the next thing I want to mention is we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, you generally think parts, assemblies, and drawings. But we have a lot of things that are really unique to Onshape. And one of the first things that I always like to mention is our frequent updates. And it very much ties into what we're talking about here today, because Onshape Mobile, the mobile app that you download from the Play Store or iTunes, is updated at the same pace that Onshape is. So roughly every 3 weeks, you're going to see an update to the Onshape mobile app. So frequent updates, new functionality constantly being rolled out. Also, the ability to to create versions built in. It's not a separate data management application. Those are core functions of Onshape. So it's not something you have to purchase or manage separately. Now, we also have the ability to import and export common CAD formats. And this is the case even on the Onshape iOS app. We have the ability to import and export common CAD formats. So we have the ability to do that on mobile. If you're emailed a file, for example, we have that ability to import. The last thing, or the second to last, forgive me, the entirely new methods of collaboration. We have the ability to work together on the same model at the same time. And this includes mobile devices. So if I edit a sketch or change a feature on my iPhone, it instantly updates for anyone looking at that same model in the browser or any other device. So real-time updates, and it doesn't matter whether one person's on a browser and the other's on a phone or tablet or whatever the combination may be, everything updates with everyone in real time. The last thing I want to mention is custom features with FeatureScript. If you're at all interested in writing code and interested in building your own CAD feature, you can do that. Onshape created a programming language called FeatureScript that allows you to build your own custom CAD feature. Really unique to Onshape, and for those that are anyway interested in writing or programming, definitely should check out FeatureScript. All right, so a few questions. One that I'm going to address in just a moment. Hi, is there any limitations or restrictions with Onshape Mobile for iPad? Is Onshape Mobile version able to perform all actions like its PC version? And this is a question that we get asked often. I would say that 98% of the functionality is there. But there is a caveat that I want to get into. So bear with me. I'm going to get into greater detail on the update process in just a second. Is there a feature function that provides where used info on a part? No, unfortunately not. We do not have a where used a way to dig through where used functionality as of today. That is something, though, that we're very aware of. Now, another question can you create sheet metal parts? And this ties into the question from earlier. Are there any limitations or restrictions? And the answer is yes, there are certain limitations, but they are primarily new functionality. Sheet metal is a good example. You cannot yet create a sheet metal part on a mobile device. That is something that we're working on, but that's an example of recent functionality that has not yet been released on mobile. And internally, what we do is we develop first for the browser. So any new Onshape features that you see are going to come to the browser first and then be available later on mobile. Now, later depends on how simple it is to implement on mobile. Sheet metal is a little bit more involved. There's flat views and tables and things like that. So just realize that we work very hard to keep them in unison, but they're always just a little bit off because of our development cycle, and just because, again, we develop for the browser first. All right, so that gets into a little bit of detail into Onshape Mobile, and this is the case for iOS or Android. It's the same story. It doesn't matter whether it's either version. They both generally stay up to just behind the latest update of Onshape. Sheet metal is a good example where we're currently working on that kind of functionality. All right, so what are we going to do here today? Well, the goal, of course, is to tour the Onshape mobile interface, build a part, add it to an assembly, and then answer any questions that you may have. Of course, as we're going through this, feel free to ask any questions, and I'll do my best to stop and address them. But again, the interface is a big one. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on the interface, and in particular, some touch gestures that can really make a big difference in using Onshape Mobile. There are some features like transform that have been in the web version for a long time now, but have not made it to mobile, and there are some features that simply will not make it to mobile for whatever reason. Are there some features that will simply not make it to mobile for whatever reason? I'm not sure if you're referring to sketch transform or feature transform. Forgive me, I can look and double check. I don't know. I'm sure that there is some example somewhere of a feature that's going to be specific to the browser because it just doesn't make sense in mobile. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one, but I'm sure there are going to be some specific examples like that. But I would say that we try very hard to include everything in mobile. It's not a second-class thing for us. It's a top priority. So any new functionality built, even when it's built for the browser and initially designed for the browser, the concept of mobile is always kept in mind so that the implementation of mobile is made easier. So I will say that it's always at the forefront, and it's always something that we want to be in unison as best we can. All right, so again, as I mentioned, we're going to tour the Onshape interface. That's going to be a big part of this. Build a part, add it to an assembly. Those are the key things that I want to focus on. The sketch tips. How do we create basic geometry, dimension it, create simple features? How do we mate parts together in an assembly? And what are some tips and tricks to getting those things done on mobile? Now, again, feel free to ask any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. iPad Pro is mobile. Yes. The Onshape app works on iPad Pro. In fact, we have dedicated functionality for the Apple Pencil. So if you have an Apple Pencil, the Force Touch, you can actually do a zoom feature we built in just for that Apple Pencil. But yes, iPad Pro, almost all of what I'm going to cover here today will work with the iPad Pro. All right, so today's webinar, I'm going to stick with an iPad, and that's only because that's what I have. It's easiest to connect to my laptop. I do have an Android tablet next to me, so if you have any Android-specific questions, just let me know. Keep in mind, almost everything should be identical. So the major things that I'm going to cover, the key pieces of the interface, the touch gesture functionality, all of that stuff is going to be the same between iOS and Android. So even if you're using Android today, and I'm doing this webinar on an iPad, much of what I'm going to cover is done the same. There are a few small differences, only to make Android users more comfortable, or iOS users more comfortable just to conform with guidelines. But for the most part, it's identical between the two. Now, I am going to be using an iPad, but also realize that a lot of this is the same on our phone. And there are some cases where we try and shrink the UI and make small changes to the interface to optimize for the screen space, but for the most part, it's going to look identical. So again, I just want to focus on the tips that apply to all devices, Android or iOS, and not specific to anyone. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, what I'm using here, bear with me for just 1 second, is QuickTime to display my iPad screen. So you should be seeing my iPad screen here. And of course, step number 1, keep in mind, download the Onshape app. That's the first step, of course. If you haven't already, log into the Google Play Store or the iTunes Store and download the Onshape app. So that's step number 1. Once you've done that, you'll tap on the app. It will prompt you to log in, much like logging in through the browser. But once you logged in, it will take you to the Documents page. Again, very much like the browser. Questions. Can mobile use keyboard shortcuts? I do not think so. I don't think keyboard shortcuts, if you have an attached keyboard to your mobile device, are supported on the mobile app. I'm not 100%, but 90%. May I get a link? Keep in mind, anyone registered for the webinar will get a link to the recording afterwards. Interfaces WebGL. Why iPad different than MacBook Air? Forgive me, I'm not sure I follow. Is it possible to use Onshape offline if you're in places without Wi-Fi access? No. Onshape is a web-based app that works entirely based on an internet connection. Now, keep in mind, you don't need Wi-Fi. You just need, you can use a 3G or 4G. You can use your phone, for example. So, I tether to my phone often to log into Onshape. Even a 3 and 4G connection is fine. But if you can't check email, for example, you won't be able to use Onshape. All right, so when we first log in, we're taken to the Documents page. Again, very much like logging in through the browser. And almost everything that I'm going to show you today is meant to mimic that experience in the browser. Now, the first thing I want to do is go through a few of the key filters. So if I tap the menu on the left, you'll see the filters pop up. I have my shared with me, created by me, any companies or teams that I belong to, publics, tutorials, trash, options to sign out, and so on. So same filter list that you see in the browser. We have search functionality here as well, right in the top right. But of course, the key things that you'll want to know when you're getting started are the icons in the bottom left here. So bottom right. So in the bottom right, you'll see a plus icon and an import icon. So just keep in mind, if you want to import a file to an Onshape document, maybe someone emailed you a step file or a Parasolid file or a SolidWorks file, or maybe you want to import an image, or something to that effect. You can choose import, browse, and import. You also have the ability to, of course, create a brand new document, and that's with the plus icon in the bottom right here. So those are really the two key things to know as you're first getting started to either import or create a new document. Now, I want to open an existing document, so I'm going to tap on it in the document menu. That's, of course, going to take us into the document, and there are a few key things to remember as you're first getting started. One of the first questions we get asked is, how do you zoom, pan, and rotate in Onshape Mobile? And to do a rotate, it's a single finger drag, right? So I use one finger and drag, right? To do a pan, it's 2 fingers and drag. And to zoom, it's simply pinch in and pinch out. Right? So pinch to zoom. Now, a quick aside, bear with me for just one moment. There is an option in Onshape to enable what we call touches. And if you bear with me for a second, this might make it a little bit more clear. There we go. Bear with me for just 1 second here. So in your settings, if you're using, in this case, the iOS app, there is a specific functionality that will allow you to see the touches. So I've enabled it. It's in the settings in your iOS device. But now you can see as I pinch here, you can see the touches on the screen, just to make it a little bit more clear what I'm doing. All right, so again, single finger drag to rotate, two finger drag to pan, and pinch to zoom. Those are the three that you really need to know when you're getting started. Now, as we're going through this, there are a few other key pieces that you'll need to know, but I want to kind of walk you through building a simple part and go through those steps, kind of like you would, a day in the life of an Onshape engineer, but on an iPad. So what I'd like to do is build a simple example of this part, right? So I'm going to start a new part studio. I'm going to tap the arrow here in the bottom left corner. You'll see all the different tabs in my document. Right, this is how I can get to all the various tabs. I want to create a new tab, a new part studio. So I tap the plus and choose Create Part Studio. Now, notice there's an option to create assembly and also import. If you want to import a file into a document, you can do that here. In this case, I want to create a new part studio, so I choose Create Part Studio, and I'm off and running. All right, I have a new blank part in my document. So now what I want to do is model something similar to that top clamp arm that you saw a moment ago. And so what I'm going to do is start a sketch on the front plane. So I'll tap the front plane. You'll see it select, right? And then I have a few options. You can tap the pencil, right, in the toolbar there, and that will start a sketch. So I've tapped the front plane, I tapped the pencil, now I'm in a sketch on the front plane. You can notice the sketch dialog in the bottom right here. Right? So it's collapsed by default, but you can expand it out. So now I'm in a sketch, I'm on the front plane, I'm ready to start sketching geometry. There's one important step, though, that I want to do before I start sketching, and that is view normal to the sketch plane. So I want to view normal to the sketch plane. One big tip that I have, and this is not specific to this command, it's used throughout Onshape Mobile, is the two-finger tap. If you tap the screen with two fingers, you get a context-sensitive list of options. It's very similar to the right-click in the browser. If you're familiar with right-clicking on something to get a certain set of options, you get something very similar if you two-finger tap in the Onshape Mobile interface. You can see I get exit, cancel, copy. But more importantly, at the bottom here, I get view normal to sketch plane. That will rotate normal to my sketch plane. Now, another big tip that I have for using Onshape Mobile is the view lock. You'll see it here in the top right corner of the interface. If you tap this, it does not allow you to rotate. Great for sketching or any scenario where you're trying to stop the ability to rotate. So just keep in mind, if you're in a sketch and all of a sudden you find yourself rotating the sketch inadvertently, try using that view lock. It makes it really easy to sketch geometry and stay in that 2D mode, so to speak, until you're done. All right, so I'm in a sketch. I'm on the front plane. My view is locked. I'm ready to start sketching. And you can see the flyout menu here of all the sketch icons. So when I tap the pencil, I see all the various sketch icons. I can swipe up and down to scroll up and down in this list. I want to start with a center point circle, so I tap that. And now I'm in the center point circle command. Now, placing circles is actually very simple. You tap once to define the center, tap twice to define the size. But placing it very accurately is a different story. And so what I'd recommend, and this is not specific to sketching, but again, it's used throughout Onshape, is what we call a tap and hold. A single finger tap and hold brings up what we call the precision selector. And if you need to select something very precisely, this is the tool that you want to use. Whether you're selecting a center point for a circle like I am here, or I'm selecting an edge for a fillet, or I'm selecting a mate connector for an assembly, this command is useful. So again, single finger, tap down, hold, and you'll see a little crosshair appear, a little cursor appear just above my finger. And so if I move my finger around, you can see that crosshair move. And the big thing is, as I move this, it behaves very similar to how the cursor would in the browser. I get those inferences, right? I can snap to horizontal. I can snap to the origin. So again, single finger tap and hold will bring up that precision selector. And then just move your finger where you want. And then as soon as you're satisfied, let go, tap one more time, and there is my circle. More importantly, my circle is placed on the origin and actually attached to it. Very similar to how I would do in the browser. All right, so let's do this one more time. I want one more circle. Single finger tap and hold brings up precision selector. Move my finger up until I get that horizontal inference to the circle on the left. Tap, and now we have a second circle. Now, of course, the next step for me is to add my dimensions. So again, I'll tap the sketch icon to expand out that menu. Tap the dimension command, right? Then tap on the circle I want to dimension. Tap one more time and enter the value for the dimension. In this case, we'll say 1. Hit the green check. And now I've entered the first dimension in my sketch. Now notice, again, very much like the browser, the first sketch scales to match that first dimension. So you don't have that scenario of geometry overlapping when you add the first value. So I want to do this again. Tap the circle on the right. Tap to input the value. The dialog appears to input my value. We'll say this is 0.625. Right. Now, of course, what I'd like to do next is define a distance dimension from the outside to the outside of each circle. So tap, tap, and tap. Right, and this should be 2.25. Green check. And now I have a fully defined sketch. If I want to move the dimensions, just simply tap and drag and move them to position them more appropriately. All right, so I see a few questions. Forgive me. The document size is displayed but removed from the browser. Why? Document size is really irrelevant now. It was an important thing in the past for the free version, but it's no longer. Everyone has unlimited storage in Onshape, so it will be removed from both eventually. Any plans to support Touch ID for login? I'm not aware of a development effort currently underway, but I do know that that is a high priority for us. I can't give you a specific date, but I do know we're aware of the need for it. I don't think we're actively working on it at the moment. One thing I would say about Onshape's development cycle is we reevaluate, roughly every 3 weeks based on requests and so on. So when I open Onshape on my iPad, I get a warning. Onshape does not support mobile browsers. Is this because I'm using an older iPad? No. An important thing to keep in mind: you do not use Onshape in the browser on a mobile device. On any mobile device, whether it's Android or iOS. There's a dedicated app for Android and iOS so that we have all the working gestures and functionality and so on. So you cannot log in through Onshape through a mobile browser. Download the Onshape mobile app from Google Play or iOS store. Do I need to send an email for recording? No. If you sign up, you will be sent an email. I use Windows 10 PC with a touchscreen with ultimate pinch, zoom, and rotate work as on the mobile app. No. We do not have a dedicated Windows app, and we do not support touch gestures on the browser. So, unfortunately, in the case of Windows PCs, the Windows touch-sensitive PCs, you'll use it just as you would a normal laptop, with a mouse or your touchpad. Didn't see create a folder icon. That's a good example of a limitation today, that you cannot create a folder to store your tabs in mobile. What function brings the pencil of iPad Pro in Part Studio? What function brings the pencil of iPad Pro in Part Studio? Keep in mind, you just have to have a Apple Pencil attached to an iPad Pro, and the Force Touch will work. It's only in that specific scenario that it will, though. It's not any other combination. How about Surface laptops? Is there any apps for Windows? No apps for Windows. How do I delete a dimension? Very good question. So I've accidentally gotten out of my sketch here, so I'm going to tap the ellipsis menu next to the sketch in the feature list. You'll see all the very similar right-click name options like rename and edit and copy. I'm going to choose rename. I'll again use a two-finger tap, view normal to sketch plane. And the question was, well, how do I delete a dimension? You can double tap the dimension and you'll see a delete button in the bottom of that dialog. So that's probably one of the easiest ways. Just double tap the dimension, choose delete at the very bottom there, and that will delete your dimension. And that's another thing. Did not see add application for the App Store. Remember that applications are developed by third parties that may not necessarily have mobile applications. So you will not be able to add applications from mobile. Right? So you won't be able to run a cloud-based FEA, for example, from your iPad or your iPhone. All right, so let's move on. Now, I've got my two circles defined. What I'd like to do next is just sketch some simple lines that join them. And I'm going to use the touch and hold. So again, touch and hold, move my cursor over, and notice that it snaps or attaches to that circle. All right, let go, drag my cursor over. If I move it to just the right point, I can get both coincident and tangent. You'll see it snap to it right there, right? Oh. Now, one big tip, if you've moved like I did there, you can quickly undo. That will take you back a step, and then just reapply the line, right? All right, so now I have the first line. Let's do the second here. So now I have two of these lines defined. Now, a few things that I want to point out. Notice that the upper line is fully defined, the bottom line is not. If I needed to remove or create constraints, first things, how do I view the constraints? You can see them by tapping on this sketch dialog, right? So I can see the constraint, and I can see what it is if I tap on it, right? So I can go through, find the constraint that I need. If you want to delete one, swipe to the left, in this case, delete. Right? Now, what about adding constraints? What if I need to add a constraint to my sketch? It's very similar to doing in the browser. You would select the geometry that you want to constrain. In this case, I'll tap the line, tap the circle, and then go in and find my tangent constraint. Right, same thing here. Tap the line, tap the circle, tap my tangent constraint. That will fully define my lines. Now, one thing that I want to stress, and this is something that's inevitable when you're using the Onshape mobile app a lot, but is you'll reach a point where, like, oh, I didn't mean to select that, or I'm no longer doing whatever it is that I thought I was going to do, and I need to clear all these selections out. And you can double tap anywhere in the background to deselect. So if you have a lot of things selected and you want to just clear out all the selections, double tap an empty space will clear out those selections. I drew an extra circle. How do I delete that? You can undo. You can tap the circle. I can tap the circle, use a two-finger tap, and delete. Right? So very similar to a right click. I can tap a circle, two-finger tap the screen. You'll see the delete option in that menu. So there's a few different ways. Undo would probably be the easiest if it's just the last step. All right, so now let's take this one step further. Let's sketch another circle. So I want center point circle. We're going to attach this to the center of the previous two. So again, single finger tap and hold. Right there. Same thing here. And now I've added two more circles that are centered on the two previous circles. Right? So again, we'll go to dimension. Tap on the circle. Tap to place our dimension, and let's say 0.75. Right? And one more time, tap the circle, tap to place it. Let's make this 0.375. All right, so now that I've got my first sketch done, right, I need to extrude. And in this case, what I'm going to do is go straight to the extrude command. So you can see the features icon in the toolbar. If I tap that, I see extrude and revolve. Now, of course, if I wasn't in a sketch, I would see the full list, the patterns and shell and so on. But in this case, I'm still in a sketch, so I see extrude, revolve, and there's my first feature. Okay. Now I can grab the manipulator, just drag it to dynamically change it. I can enter a value. If I tap in the depth here, let's say 0.75, but you have all the same options that you would in the browser. So for instance, surface, you can create a surface body here. You can create a new part, merge with an existing part, or remove, create a cut. You can select individual sketch regions, just like you can in the browser. You can define end types, besides blind, symmetric, up to next, up to face, all the same list that you have there. You can even go in 2 different directions if you choose to. All of that available here. Right. So just keep in mind, once you're done, hit the check, and now you have your first feature in your first part. Now, one thing that gets asked often, and one thing that I wanted to point out, and it's a commonly asked question, is there a way to quickly hide all the planes? In the browser, we have like a P key where I can hide all the planes, and we don't have the exact equivalent of that. But one quick way that you can do that is just tap each plane, 2-finger tap, hide. All right, hide 3 features. So it's very similar. You're just tapping each plane, 2-finger tap, and then hide. And if you want to show them, you can just tap the eye next to them in the feature list. And by the way, if you wanted to edit a feature, change a feature, delete a feature, rename a feature, just tap the ellipsis menu next to it. So if I needed to edit that sketch and change the dimension, I saw one comment there, the top line is not tangent. So if I made a mistake and I need to go back and make a change to it, I can easily edit the sketch and jump back in there. All right, so let's move on. What I'd like to do next is create a simple cut. If you remember from our finished swing arm example, this has this angle cut in it in both directions. So let's jump back to our part and do something very similar. I'm going to tap the top plane. I'll use the 2-finger tap to select the sketch command, right? And 2-finger tap, view normal to sketch plane. Right? So now I can start sketching. Now what I want is just a simple triangle. Now, one big tip that I have, very useful, notice that I'm not getting the inference from that bottom point. Just like in the browser, if I move my finger over that point, it will wake up the inference. So I can get that snap behavior that I'm used to even on mobile, right? Move this down. Let's connect it down. Okay. All right. So we've got our simple triangle. Now what we want to add is a few dimensions. Now, I can tap, add a dimension here. This should be 0.625. And the angle dimension, just a matter of tapping the 2 lines, making that 20. Now, what I want to do is I really want to project or use the edges of the existing feature. And if you remember, this has a radius on either end of the part, but what I want to do is get the silhouette, so to speak, of that edge. And we can use the use command to accomplish this. So I'll tap use, 1-finger tap and hold, and then move my cursor over that edge. All right, tap use, 1-finger. Notice it highlights pink, indicating the silhouette, let go, and it converts that to a sketch line, just like it would, again, in the browser. So if you're familiar with the use command, sometimes referred to as convert or project, you'll see it here in mobile as well. Now, what I want to do is then attach my line to that line. So tap, will make those coincide. All right. So now I've got my sketch defined. Let's go to the extrude command, and we're going to do an extrude remove, right? So we want to create a cut. So we'll choose remove. Now I need to create a cut going in both directions, right? So I need a second in position as well. So the first in position, I want to set it to through all. I want to define a second in position, so I'm going to check that and then define through all as well. Right, so now I'm saying through all for both in positions. Right, I can tap the check to accept, and we're off and running. Right, so we've got our second feature. All right, so very simple stuff. I'm sure if you've spent any kind of time with Onshape in the browser, this workflow is not a new concept. Creating sketches and features is not new. The idea is just getting a hang of the really key things for mobile. The two-finger tap. The two-finger tap is probably one of my biggest tips, or the single-finger tap and hold. It just means that you can actually do things accurately, and not just place things randomly in space and depending on constraints and a lot of manual effort to define it. All right, so now what I'd like to do is go over a simple example of a fillet. So we'll tap the features command. You can see all the different features, right? So all my patterns and shell and loft and all those different kinds of commands, including any custom features that I've created or I've inserted, right? So in this case, fill pattern, wiring, and a few other things. But I just want a simple fillet, so I'll tap fillet. Now I want to define the top edge here, right? This edge along the top edge here of the part as the edge for my fillet. And this would be an example where it's difficult to just tap and get the exact edge that you want, and not a face, for instance. So this would be another example where I would use the precision selector. So again, a single finger tap and hold will bring up the precision selector, even outside of the sketch. Right? This is another example where I'm using single finger tap and hold. But it makes it easy to select that edge and not accidentally the face or something around it. So single finger tap and hold brings up the precision selector, not just in the sketch, but also in the part in the assembly as well. In this case, let's add a fillet 0.5 green check, and we'll accept that fillet. All right, so now you can see the fillet in my feature list, and you can see the fillet on my part. All right, we'll do this one more time. Notice that the most recent icon, the most recent command, I should say, that you've used will stay here in the toolbar. So if I wanted to go back and create another fillet, it's just a matter of tapping that. I don't have to go back into the features menu to do that. And for this, let's say we want a radius of 0.05. And again, single finger tap and hold, select the edge of the part, and it grabs everything around it. There we go. All right, so that's our simple example of a basic part, creating it, sketch basics, and so on. Started register for the webinar for the 2 minutes ago. I was only able to get in now, 45 minutes later. Okay, so is it better to use a pencil instead of your finger to do sketch positioning editing? It's designed to work with your fingers. If you feel more comfortable with a pencil, I know there are users out there, especially with the Apple Pencil, that are really comfortable, but it's really designed to be used with the finger. You should be able to accomplish everything you need with it. Can you please show us extrude again? Well, we can edit the feature, right, and you'll see the extrude dialog appear. So if I need to go back and edit it, I can. Forgive me if I'm not sure what you mean by just showing you the extrude. How do you measure? Good question. And can you launch a keyboard and use F and N? No, there's no way to launch a keyboard shortcuts in the mobile app. How do you measure? Measure and mass and all those things are built in. So in this case, you can see on the top right a little measure icon. So if I tap an edge and then hit this measure icon, you'll see it in the top right here. It will give me a measurement. Right? So you can see the diameter, the center point, and so on. Right? If you tap two faces, it's very similar to the browser. If you tap two faces, it'll give you the distance between them. But again, keep in mind measures in the top right corner. Same thing goes for mass if you're trying to figure out the mass of your part. All right, so we've covered the basic part modeling stuff, sketching and part creation. And again, to recap, single finger tap and hold is a very important one. Two finger tap is very important. And then, of course, you need to know single finger drag to rotate, two finger drag to pan, pinch to zoom. Those are real key things. Another thing to keep in mind, very useful in the sketch especially, is that view lock in the top right. So if you find yourself inadvertently rotating the model while you're trying to sketch, try using this view lock here. All right, so one other thing that I wanted to point out before I get into assemblies, and that is some of the collaborative aspects of this. You can see this entire time I actually have two different people in this document, and I can tap the collaborators menu in the top right, just like tapping the user in a browser, and I can even double tap and go into follow mode. So you can even follow users in a browser, for instance, from your iPad, right? Very similar to follow mode in the browser. But again, double tapping that icon allows you to follow them. You can also add comments and view comments, of course, from Onshape Mobile. So you can add a comment, add your comment here, type in add, and then add any comment that you'd like. Okay. All right, so now that we've got the basics, the key thing are those gestures. Let's get into assemblies. Really the last thing that I want to discuss here today, and that is, the details of putting together assemblies in Onshape Mobile. So let's jump into it. Now, what I'd like to do, I've already got a few parts assembled here. What I'd like to do is insert that clamp arm that we modeled onto this assembly and just walk through the insert and the mate process. So let's start with insert. You can see it in the far left corner here, insert icon. So I choose insert, and then I choose the part or assembly that I want to insert. You can choose from the current document. You can choose from other documents, linked documents. In this case, I want to choose finished arm. All right. Now it's going to place it on the origin. That's fine. I can tap the check to accept it, and then tap the part, and then simply drag it any way I want. All right. So one big tip that is in the assembly, if you tap the part, a triad will appear, and you can grab a manipulator, move it in any direction that you want. Okay. So one easy way to manipulate the model. But of course, the goal here is to attach the swing arm to the top of the plunger. And then this thing should move up and down in that travel of a pneumatic cylinder. So what I want to do is create a mate, of course. I want to mate the swing arm to the top of the plunger. Now, all of the assembly tools you can find under the assembly dropdown. Right, so the assembly icon next to insert, you'll find fasten mate, revolute, slider, planer, cylindrical, pin slot, and all the different mate types. In this case, we want a fastened mate, and I want to attach the top of the swing arm to the top of the plunger. This is another example where the precision selector is really, really useful. I'd say probably one of the more useful examples of it. In the assembly, you need to select the mate connector very precisely. You need to select, the top edge or the bottom or the middle, or whatever it may be. And getting that just by randomly tapping is not very likely. But tap and hold, and you get the precision selector, and then I can very precisely move around and establish this is my mate connector, right? This is the point that I want. So now I've got my first mate connector defined. Again, single finger tap and hold. Move over the plunger here, get my second mate connector, and the two are mated. Right. So again, identical workflow to working in the browser. Instead of left clicking each point, your single finger tap and hold, then move that finger over what you want to mate. Select your point, and the two are brought together. So that's the idea behind the precision selector. Whether you're trying to precisely place a line or a circle, or trying to precisely define an edge for a fillet, or trying to precisely define a mate connector, any of those scenarios, single finger tap and hold will make all the difference in being able to actually select the thing that you want. Right. So all right, so once I've done that, I have, by the way, the same option, so I can reorient the secondary in 90-degree increments. I can flip the primary if I needed to. I can add offsets if I needed to, if I needed a small gap between them. So those same options that you'd see in the browser. But I'm going to hit the check, and there we are. Right. So now I've established my fastened mate there in my instance list. You'll see it here. If I needed to edit, delete, rename, whatever it may be, I just tap the ellipsis menu next to the mate, and you'll see all those options. And by the way, a quick test: if we tap the part and drag it, I should be able to move this, and it moves up and down with the plunger. Right, so that fasten mate attached my swing arm to the plunger. The plunger, of course, still free to move. So when I drag and grab and drag, I can see that dynamic motion. Right. So that's kind of a quick crash course in Onshape's mobile interface. As I mentioned before, the key things that I wanted to stress are just really those touch gestures. Without knowing those, it can be difficult to do the things you're trying to do. But realize, if you just want to view, just very simple to do. Tap the tabs, single finger drag to rotate. But if you really want to edit and make changes from your phone or from your tablet, the 2-finger tap, the single finger tap and hold, those are all really critical things that you'll need to know. One last thing, it's a commonly asked question, and that is drawings. What about drawings? And as of today, we have very limited or next to no ability to edit a drawing on mobile. You can of course view it. You can insert sheets, but you can't, insert dimensions or do any of those types of operations. So drawings are really view only. So just keep in mind, you can view drawings, but there's really not a lot of functionality in terms of creating new drawings. That's still a desktop, browser thing. So it is something we're aware of, something that we're working on, but just realize as of today, it's a view thing. It's strictly about viewing. All right, so I see a few questions that I haven't got to, so bear with me. I am going to stick around and make sure that they are all addressed. Real quickly here, let's jump back into our slides. All right, so again, stick around and ask any questions that you'd like. I'm going to make sure that all of them are addressed, so feel free to ask any questions. But that's what I had planned for you. So thank you, everyone, and have a good day.